So I want to welcome you to the preview presentation of the Brahms Requiem. We are very excited for our upcoming Big Sing in a few weeks, and this is one way for us to help build excitement for others as well. So I am Lars Myron. I am the administrator and also the marketing director for Columbia Choirs, which is based in Redmond. And I am also the membership chair of the GSCC. The GSCC, of course, being the sponsoring organization of the 2018 Big Sing, and a wonderful organization that was established to build and support the choral arts in our community, in the greater Seattle community and beyond, north all the way up to Bellingham, south all the way down to the border. It is our mission to get singers to continue to sing, get new people to sing in choirs, and to just have a great time while we do it. And in a few, I will be handing it over to Gary Cannon. He is a former member of the board of directors of the GSCC, and he is currently the artistic director of Emerald Ensemble, Cascadian Choral, and Vashon Island Choral.
And he has a lot more gray hairs than that picture should imply. I need to fix that.
He has graciously offered his time and his knowledge of both Brahms and the piece to give us a little bit of a preview of what to expect and get excited about when we sing all together on October 20th. So you will hear from him shortly as well. So I'm going to briefly cover what the 2018 Big Sing is and what to expect, and then I will hand it over for a little history and preview of the piece by Gary Cannon. So first of all, the 2018 Big Sing is coming up on Saturday, October 20th, 2018. Singing will begin at 7 p.m. and the event will be held at Seattle First Baptist Church, which is south between Capitol Hill and First Hill. So South Capitol Hill, and the address is there on Harvard Avenue. It's a wonderful venue for those of you that participated in the Seattle Sings Festival last year. That was the venue of the Seattle Sings Festival. So we're really looking forward to returning to Seattle First Baptist Church for a little bit of a different event, but also singing. What to expect? So getting there, I gathered some of this information from the First Baptist website, but there is parking available. There are a few pay lots, and there's also street parking available. If you are a public transit rider, the First Baptist website says that routes 2, 9, 11, 12, 43, 49, and 60 will get you within a block or two of the church, so those are all options, as well as the First Hill streetcar, and the Link Light Rail will take you to the Capitol Hill station, Broadway, and Denny, and then it's about 6 or 7 blocks south from there. So those are all options for how to get there. We will be opening the doors to the church 45 minutes prior to 7, so 6:15. At that point, you are more than welcome to come whenever you want to come and check in, to pay. So the entry fee is $10 for all attendees. People have the option to sing, people have the option to sit and listen, to do a little bit of both, whatever they would like to do. And also students are free with their valid student ID. So if you know any students who are looking to tackle a masterwork, this is a great opportunity for them to do so. And we would love to have lots of students there. And then another note about sort of that 45 minutes before 7, we have collected scores from members from the GSCC that we will have there for you to check out and return to us at the end of the night. So if that's something that you would like to have a physical score and you do not own one, we will have some available. But you may also bring your own score, and in our original email, we sent out links to download electronic versions of the scores. So we will send that information out again, but that is also an option if you want to bring a tablet to be eco-friendly. You can do that as well. But come 6:15, 6:30, whenever works for you. Come and find a seat in your section, meet the people around you, and be ready to sing at 7 p.m. Choral conductors, so we have divided this piece into 10 movements, or parts of movements in some cases, and we will be welcoming conductors from 10 of our GSCC member choirs to come and lead us in part of this piece. We have a few of those conductors on the phone here. Gary is one of them, Lori, Jennifer, and we have many more signed up as well. So that'll be a fun way to work with different conductors from the region. We will also be welcoming guest musicians Maria Ministo, soprano soloist, and Jacob Herbert, baritone soloist, and also fabulous accompanist Serena Chin. So we're very excited to have all of these musicians come together to lead us in singing through the piece. And one more note about the music here. We will be primarily singing the piece in German, but we would love for you to come and not be worried about the German. If you would rather sing in English, solfege, we've had someone say they want to sing on la, whatever is going to get you to sing, we are happy for you to come and sing that. So feel free to have that flexibility. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to turn it over to Gary to tell us everything that we need to know.
I wish I knew everything that one needs to know. Thank you very much, Lars. I should add too, as an opening line, I suppose, I'm happy for this to also be something of a conversation, not just a lecture, as it were. So yes, you can type in questions, but if something's really at the forefront of your mind, then go ahead and I'd say chime on in. And if you do it too much, I'll just tell you, no, that's not true. I won't do that. I thought we'd begin by talking a little about Brahms himself and his life before the Requiem, because the Requiem is really a central piece in his life as well as in his compositional output. He is not too unusual in that he was born into relatively unprepossessing circumstances in Hamburg, in the port city in the north of Germany. At the time, it was not very well noted for its music. His father, though, was a musician. He was a freelancer. He played double bass at taverns and militia bands, things like that. His mother was 17 years older than her husband. She was a seamstress. And music was very much part of their household. Brahms studied piano from the age of 7, and very soon he was already playing professionally in restaurants and in theaters. You may have heard the scurrilous rumor that he also played at seaside brothels. That rumor has since been debunked, and whether you are pleased to hear that or saddened, reality is such. So in 1853, when he was just 20 years old, he was touring as a pianist through Germany with a violinist. And on that tour, he met the composer-pianist Franz Liszt and also the violinist Joseph Joachim, who was one of the great violinists of that century. And Joachim was particularly impressed by Brahms and encouraged him to introduce himself to Robert Schumann, kind of the doyen, the leader of German musical establishment at the time. So Brahms just went out to Dusseldorf and decided to knock on Schumann's door. And that happened in October of 1953. That was September 1853, and the very next month, in October, Schumann wrote an article in his journal, the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik, in which he essentially announced Brahms as the next global genius, the heir to Beethoven. Brahms was 20. No pressure, right? So think where you were when you were 20, and then if the leader in your field said that about you, how would you feel? In any case, Brahms kind of became part of the Schumann household, especially 4 months later, when Schumann suffered a mental breakdown and leapt off a bridge in an attempted suicide. He was incarcerated into an asylum. Schumann's wife, Clara, was one of the great pianists, perhaps of all time, but certainly of her time. And so, to help make ends meet, she re-energized her concertizing through Europe. Brahms was already close to them. He actually moved in with the household. He took care of the family and to business matters, kind of like a secretary or an aide-de-camp. He remained close to Clara through the rest of their lives. You may have heard another scurrilous rumor that they were lovers or had some special attachment like that. While they were very, very close, it's clear from their letters that nothing physical particularly happened. In fact, later on, a few years after the Requiem was written, Brahms became quite smitten with one of Clara's daughters, and that's another sad story. So this situation went on for just over 2 years, and Robert then died in the asylum, and so Brahms then could open up his own life a little more. He began to perform with greater frequency. During this time frame, he undertook 2 seasonal appointments during summers, essentially, that are particularly important in light of his choral life. One is he became the conductor of the court choir and orchestra in the city of Detmold, town really, and he also directed an amateur women's choir in Hamburg and wrote some wonderful music for them all. And in 1862 he paid his first visit to Vienna. He developed a reputation for his chamber music, his piano works, his solo art songs, the Lieder, but he didn't have a broad appeal among the body public. He was just appreciated by connoisseurs. He had been in Vienna for just a year when he was invited to conduct a large choir. We would think of it today as a symphonic choir called the Vienna Singakademie. And his programming there is really illustrative or demonstrative of his interests in music in general, and specifically in choirs. He programmed a fair number of Renaissance motets, quite a lot of Bach, and also earlier 19th century works. All of these were more or less niche parts of the repertoire. So these choices really show a refined ear for the music of the near and distant past. Those earlier styles fundamentally influenced his own choral compositions. At the time he was writing quite a lot of sacred and secular music for choirs. The Opus 29 motets, the Schaffe in mir Gott, which is still very well known, comes from that time frame, for example. So that kind of gets us right up to the Requiem, which was inspired by a situation in 1865. So he had been in Vienna for just a few years. That was the death of Brahms' mother. He had remained very close to his parents even after they divorced, and so it was her death that inspired him to start writing this Requiem. Feelings about the deaths of his mother and of Schumann came up. In fact, he even resurrected some materials that he had composed in the year of Schumann's breakdown. And having said that, I think now is a good time. I see we have a few messages in here, and are there questions in there just about Brahms in general?
Just a running commentary of your presentation at this point.
Yeah. Oh, joy. Well, there are scandals later. Well, actually, are there really? Huh. I'll try to make one up by the time we're done. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything there yet. So as Brahms had these thoughts in mind, he was usually plagued by self-criticism. But he wrote this piece in its original form in just over a year. It's pretty quick for him for work of this degree of complexity. In that version, it was about an hour long, and it was just 6 movements. I'll mention later where the 7th came from, or where the other one came from. At this point, also, there was no soprano soloist yet. It just had baritone, mixed chorus, and a large orchestra, the largest orchestra he had written for yet. I'm often intrigued by the way that a piece of music comes to the public, and I feel like that says something about how we still today look at the piece of music. It didn't receive a huge, big initial premiere. Its first performance was just the first three movements, in fact, in December 1867, and it just got a kind of mixed reaction. Not everybody paid a lot of attention. How you could not pay attention after having just heard that big fugue at the end of the third movement, I don't know, but oh well. It wasn't until next April, in fact on Good Friday, that all six movements were performed together. That was at the cathedral in Bremen, and it was a huge, rousing success. The very next month, so he had finished the piece already 2 years earlier, but that next month, in May of 1868, he added what is now the fifth movement, which includes the soprano solo. The legend is, I won't say it's a scurrilous rumor, because it might actually be true. The legend is that he wrote this very soon after visiting his mother's gravesite. Some see in this movement that the soprano soloist is essentially the voice of his mother. And I don't know, later if we do a kind of blow-by-blow through the movements, I can tell a little more about that. That piece, so that movement, the fifth movement, was added to the other six, and the whole thing was first performed the next February in 1869 in Leipzig, and it was an absolute flop, an absolute failure. There's the scandal. How could Leipzig not recognize the masterpiece? Leipzig actually had a history of not liking Brahms. When his first piano concerto was performed there several years prior, that was a flop there too. So take that, Leipzig. Fortunately for the piece, the previous premiere in Bremen was such a huge success that the work came to be performed throughout Europe and in the U.S. as well. This was, in fact, Brahms's big break into the public. It turned out to be the largest work he would ever write, the longest. So it's interesting to me that he hit it big with his huge piece and never really quite went up to that stature as well. The Requiem predates all of his symphonies, most of the concertos, most of the other shorter works for chorus and orchestra, like the Alto Rhapsody and Schicksalslied and Nenia. Those all came from later years as well. In fact, Schumann had kind of prophesied that this would happen in that earlier article. He encouraged Brahms, and I quote, to direct his magic wand where the massed forces of chorus and orchestra may lend him their power. Schumann was right. The moment Brahms did that, he just took off. Let's see. Let's look for some more questions before we get into the piece itself. Stupid Leipzig. I agree. Oh, the Freudian or potentially Jungian notions of the fifth movement, I will leave to your imagination rather than decree them from where I'm sitting. So the first step, of course, for anybody when you're setting a big piece of music like that is figuring out the text. And the text for the Brahms Requiem is one of those very unusual and special groupings. Traditionally, a requiem in Latin would consist of liturgical texts from the Catholic Church that would be heard at the Mass for the Dead. Brahms, however, thwarted that element of tradition and went to a different tradition that dated back at least to the 17th century and Heinrich Schütz. Often early Lutherans would title their works with Catholic references like Mass, Requiem, Passion, Oratorio even, but their texts would be biblical or even just freely poetic, and they tended to be in the vernacular language as well. So that's the real reason why when Brahms came to especially publish the work, it was titled Ein Deutsches Requiem, a German Requiem. After the piece gained popularity beyond Germany, Brahms, in fact, regretted that title. He once wrote, I will admit that I could happily omit the German and simply say human, or for mankind. This becomes particularly important when we look at the different movements and what he's doing with the text there, how he really is perceiving this as a universal statement. Brahms himself compiled this text using an 1833 kind of modernization of Martin Luther's original German translation. Brahms's personal library still exists, still survives. His Bible is fascinating. It includes extensive markings and marginalia that show his searches for text to set for this and other pieces. It's a very sophisticated libretto. I'm not going to go into all the details of which psalm and which book everything goes into. That's all documented well elsewhere as well. But really, its only equal in music history is that of Charles Jennens' libretto for Handel's Messiah. I'll start a scandal by decreeing that that is its only equal. And if you know another one, send it in, because great librettos are great. When Brahms wrote this text, or when he compiled this text, he made two very, very important and fascinating decisions that get to the heart of the piece and really get deeply into Brahms's mind as well. First, there is no mention whatsoever of Jesus Christ. And in fact, at that big premiere at the cathedral in Bremen, that became kind of an issue. They were uncomfortable with this piece because of that. So what they did is they had an alto soloist sing Messiah, the Messiah excerpt, "I Know That My Redeemer Liveth," between the third movement and then the intermission that followed it. I know of no performance that has done that in recent times, but I don't know, it's kind of an interesting notion. The second big decision that Brahms made is, though this is a requiem, there's no mention of the dead until the second to last movement. And then it's only in the context of their becoming unverweslich, undecomposable, or as the King James Version calls it, incorruptible. So very clearly this was a work written not for the dead, but really for the living. And he sets that up right in the first movement. Let me see what other thoughts we have here. Ooh, we could do a unison version of "I Know That My Redeemer Liveth." That would be so cool. I wonder who is conducting the fifth movement. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. Huh. Fascinating. Okay. So unless there's specific questions and chime in, I can go into kind of each movement to let you know a little bit about what to expect as you're hearing. And maybe if you know the piece really well, I hope that these thoughts will give you something else to listen for as you're moving along through the piece. So I kind of give each of these movements informal titles. Number one I call the introduction. Number two, a funeral march on Ländler. Three is a sermon and fugue. Someone should really title a composition Sermon and Fugue. Then a church anthem, then consolation, then a dramatic scena, and then the conclusion or the moral of the story. And it very much is kind of a story as it unfolds here. The first movement, I call it an introduction, in part because it's slow and steady, which is what one would expect in a symphonic introduction, but also because he really clearly and overtly presents his motivic material. There's one scholar and conductor, Leonard Van Camp, who has identified 16 different little motives, almost like Wagnerian leitmotifs. I just want to mention three of them, because these three are things that you can kind of latch onto right at the beginning of the piece, and they recur in every movement. They're just littered throughout. So the first is the very opening, and I wish I were technologically savvy enough to have a recording or something of just the 4 seconds of each motive. The very opening begins with just low octaves, and if the orchestra were playing, then the cellos would join in a minor seventh above them. it's very odd, very unconventional, and quite striking to start with a dissonance, particularly that dissonance. This interval of a minor seventh is crucial through the whole piece. That and its kind of cousin, the tritone, they're just linchpins. In fact, when the chorus comes in, that's the interval that the altos end up singing. A lot of the melodic material outlines a minor seventh, so there may be 2 or 3 pitches in the middle, but those would be the extremes. As you go about singing it, you could do like a minor seventh bingo. If you call the bingo, or each minor seventh you sing, you have to take a shot. I don't know. Brahms, I'm sure, would actually love that. So that's one thing to listen for, minor sevenths. The second is the motive that the sopranos sing right from the beginning. That rising third and then a half step, which Leonard Van Camp calls that the blessed motive, and it does come back in important moments that deal with blessing. Nearly every melody in the entire Requiem begins with this formation, or its inversion, or its retrograde. So you'll have it'll start with a rising third, then a half step, or they'll turn it upside down, like a falling third and then a following half step, or backwards. It'll go up a half step and then up a third, or down a half step and down a third. It's littered throughout. Brahms really did, by the way, intend these consciously. He called them seed corns, this notive of sprinkling the corn, the seed corn, throughout the entire piece. So those are 2, the minor seventh, and then this third plus half step. The third, the last of these seed corns that I'll mention, is probably my favorite because of what it signifies in his own life. And it consists of 3 pitches, F, then A, then back to F. Sometimes it's an A flat, but I don't know much in this piece. Anyway, it's heard near the end in the first movement, twice in the sopranos in 2 different octaves, F, A, F. That signifies Brahms's personal motto, that which he lived by, frei aber froh, F-A-F, meaning free but happy. It's quite fascinating that Brahms never settled down, never had, as far as we know, a really serious romantic relationship. He lived in Vienna, and especially after he became more, wouldn't say exactly wealthy right after the Requiem, but as he became financially solvent, he could just be free and just live how he wanted and be happy. This FAF motive appears in many of his works, particularly the Third Symphony. If you like that piece, then it's because you must like being free but happy. Sometimes he transposes it. I was looking through the score today and saw a spot in the second movement where the tune goes through G flat, B flat, G flat, which is close enough to FAF that it's certainly related to that. So these 3 things, the minor seventh, the third then half step, and FAF, those are things that you can look for in your own part as you sing. If you have rests, listen to the other parts, see if you find that. It's also, they're strewn about the orchestra. So there you go, you get to have fun with that. The first movement introduces those ideas. With the text, blessed are they who mourn, or really, literally, it's they that carry sorrow. Again, this is a requiem not for the dead, but for the living, as consolation for us. The second movement I like to call the Funeral March with Ländler. The music that it begins with was something that he actually wrote in 1854, just after Robert Schumann's mental breakdown. He took it from he was trying to write a symphony, and then he converted it into a sonata for 2 pianos, and then he gave up on the whole thing, and now here it is in part of the Requiem. In its original form, it was kind of a saraband cum scherzo, which you can kind of hear the saraband emphasis on the second beat. da ya ba ba da ya ba ba, and so forth. But when it's orchestrated as he does, in this case, it becomes a kind of off-kilter funeral march. When the choir enters, they're in unison, and the tone is made darker by the omission of the sopranos. So sopranos, if you are jealous of the others that they get to sing, just know that your silence is part of Brahms's will, that by being silent, you are contributing to the greatness of, never mind. So the whole point of that really emphasizes the text's evocation of the apparent pointlessness of life. For all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of mankind as the grass's flowers. Boom. Not a happy text, right, really. The middle section of this movement is a Ländler, that is a kind of Austrian peasant dance, lighter, gentler. And the text here is about the fieldsman who patiently waits for his crop to grow. How appropriate that a farmer be represented by this Austrian peasant dance. But the funeral march comes back. And Brahms is not quite happy or ready to give us something happy quite yet. Third movement is what I call the sermon with fugue. And really, Laurie, you're a composer. You could write a piece called Sermon and Fugue. It begins with the baritone soloist. I have long felt that this baritone soloist takes on essentially the role of a Lutheran pastor, kind of proclaiming for everybody, Lord, teach me yet that I have an end. Teach me where is my end, that life has a finish, and so forth. The textures are very low, very dark, and the accompaniment, whether it be orchestral or piano, is very sparse, and harmonically it's unsettled, more so than we've experienced yet. It brings in, this is the first time we really have a sense of personal weakness, and not just a philosophical sense, but it's teach me that I have an end. The baritone sings his little bit. The chorus then follows like a faithful congregation, having heard their pastor, and they repeat what the baritone has sung. But in their case, they amplify it to a grand statement of Ich hoffe auf dich, I hope in you. And here we leap into the big fugue, the first of two big fugues in this piece, as I shoo my cat away from walking on my keyboard. Here we go. The big fugue is big. The thing that I especially want to mention in the fugue is the pedal point near the end. Traditionally, really long fugues, or longish fugues even, like this one, will lead up to its ending point with a low, long note that's just held and held and held and held for a long time, and then it will resolve. It'll move either down a fifth to the tonic, to the home pitch, the pitch which is the focus of the music at that point. Brahms's pedal is a low D, and it's there forever, and it's in the orchestra. It's magnificent, but instead of relenting at the end, the D stays strong and reveals itself to be the long-expected tonic. Brahms called it the eternal D. The English music critic, who we know better as a playwright now, George Bernard Shaw, was not so flattering toward this. He was not a big fan of Brahms, but that's another story entirely. This eternal D represents, I'd say, the positivism that we get in this text. The souls of the righteous are in God's hand, and no torment will touch them. It's the first real kind of emphatic positive comfort that we get. So, as I said, at the very first performance which was in Vienna, just stop there. That's it. So when you get to that point, imagine if the work did end. How satisfied would you feel as an audience member? Remember that this kind of came with a mixed reaction at that point. Then in the second performance, the Bremen Cathedral performance, this is the point where you would now hear, I Know That My Redeemer Liveth. Then there would be an intermission. Then we'd hear the rest of the piece. In fact, whenever I've conducted the Brahms Requiem, I also put an intermission at this point. I think it works very well. And in light of intermissions, let's see if there are other questions. Laurie has sermon and fugue is also known as a cantata. Yes, no. It could be some cantatas. Sure. I like that this one. It has the very specific focus of the sermon that I quite like. In the sense of Bach, perhaps you mean that a Bach cantata. I like that notion. That brings Bach into this third movement structurally in a way that I hadn't thought of. Thank you for saying that, Laurie. Was Clara an alto? Whoa, I don't know. I'll have to ask somebody. I'm going to write this down. I don't know what she sang. What a great question. All right. So, intermission is over. I have no idea if in the Big Sing we'll be taking a break at this point. And when we continue then into the fourth movement, this one I just call the church anthem, and that's because that's how it is most well known and most beloved. It is the most famous section of the Requiem, usually with the translation, "How lovely is your dwelling place." So that's the big hit that everybody loves, except for Brahms. As is so often the case, composers may disdain some of their most broadly beloved pieces. In 1865, he wrote that this movement was the weakest part of the German Requiem, and he even considered replacing it with something different. But we can thank Clara Schumann, who really liked this movement, and of course, far be it from Brahms to ignore Clara's recommendations. And so, How Lovely Is Your Dwelling Place remains. It is unusual in the piece, and therefore it's appropriate that it occupies the central position, number 4 out of 7. It's unusual because Brahms puts aside weighty theological notions, and he also puts aside the complex harmonic developments that he had in the second and third movements. It's much more straightforward. It is relaxed, gentle. I'd even call it lilting. It's almost maybe halfway to a Viennese waltz. He does allow himself one moment of fancy. At the big climax, it's very brief, but it's what we call a double fugato. So a fugato is like a miniature fugue. You'd have one tune as it comes in the different voices, taking turns. But in this case, it's doubled. So you have two different melodic ideas, one fast, one slow, that are coming in time and joining in together. The result of this is a rhythmic juxtaposition that Brahms loved. He has it all over the place. It's called a hemiola. Essentially, when you have a slow 3 over a fast 3, then it puts different emphases on different beats, interestingly. It's like if there were a 3-2 meter overlaid over a 3-4 meter. And I think that's all that I'll say about the famous fourth movement. If you have sung this fourth movement many times, which I'm sure many folks will have done, then this is a great one to go back and start looking for those 3 seed chords that I mentioned, the FAF, the third followed by half step, and the minor seventh hunting in there. So after the church anthem, and that mention specifically of heaven, of the dwelling place, is when we come to the fifth movement, which I call Consolation. This is the one that was added 2 years after the rest. And it's very unusual. Brahms takes an unusual approach in the relationship between the soloist and the chorus. It is the only movement that includes a soprano soloist. As I mentioned, it may or may not represent his mother. At this point, the two sing, in fact, different texts, as it progresses, at least. The soprano soloist sings a text of very direct consolation, as if spoken from the deceased to the living. She sings, "You now have sadness, but I will see you again." The soprano sings in a constantly high register, floating above everything. I am so excited to hear Maria Ministo, one of my favorite sopranos in town, sing this, because it's such a glorious moment. One soprano of note, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, who was very famously associated with this part, with this moment with the Brahms Requiem, she is alleged to have said that such height was needed to explore meanings of such depth. Wonderfully German way of looking at the Brahms Requiem. I love it. So meanwhile, the choir is simply just a support. They gently intone the text, "I will comfort you as a mother would comfort." In fact, when one of the performances that I conducted of this, I had the choir just sit down for this movement, so that it really becomes like a solo art song with choir backup. So that's the fifth movement, the interloper, the one he added later. The sixth movement is one that I call a dramatic scena, which is just fancy for scene because I'm pretentious. The baritone returns. He takes on again his role as a pastor, and the choir again repeats what he says. The text is a dramatic shift, though, from the comfort you just heard. "For we have here no permanent city, but the future city we seek." And then a text which we also know from Handel's Messiah. "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all pass away, but we shall be changed in a glimpse of an eye. At the hour of the last horn, zu der Zeit der letzten Posaune." I love the fact that in German, it is not a trumpet that sounds the Judgment Day. It is a French horn, die letzten Posaune. So there you have that. And that actually explains a bit about why some composers set that, in a way. So then we come to the middle section, which some folks have called Brahms's Dies Irae, referencing the hyper-dramatic music that usually accompanies the Latin Requiem's announcement of the Judgment Day. And it's true that this is the fastest and loudest section of the work, but really it's free from the kind of theatrical effects that one would expect from the Dies Irae, largely. The harmony is somewhat simple. It derives from the Cascadian sequences, wow, there's a Freudian slip, cascading sequences of "Hell, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting?" To a big homophonic final pronouncement. Notice here it is not a Dies Irae. It is not heaven judging, but it is hell that is conquered. I love this bit. If I remember correctly, this is the section that I get to conduct, and that's huzzah. So after this big dramatic moment, after the Dies Irae, Brahms doesn't let it stop. He brings in the second big fugue. This movement is huge. I strongly encourage you to, even though it's very exciting in the middle of the sixth movement, save yourselves, save a little bit of your voice for the fugue, because it's worth it. The fugue text, "Herr, du bist würdig," Lord, you are worthy. It's based on a melody that is 4 measures long, and it is once again based on that opening 3-note motive, but now it's the descending half step and then the third. It's just littered throughout. The music kind of pulls back 3 times. It modulates fascinatingly. They're great modulations as he's changing key mysteriously to new areas, with really a kind of delicacy that nobody else had done since the Baroque, since Bach and his time. Each time that the fugue subject returns, I said it kind of drifts away 3 times and it comes back, each time it occurs in a quicker stretto. Stretto just means that the entrances are compressed. They're closer to each other. So at the beginning, it was 4 measures long, or after 4 measures, the next part comes in. Then, later, the span between the entries is just 2 measures. And then the third time, the span is just 1 measure. And then the last time, finally, it happens just after half of a measure. And so the full choir just acclaims, Herr, 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 Lord, Lord, Lord. It's absolutely genius. The amount of delicacy, the amount of refinement in the construction and the craftsmanship is just extraordinary. And really this could only have been written by somebody who had truly digested Bach and the Renaissance. Conceiving of a tune like Row, Row, Row Your Boat that you could just come in one after the other at any point and still make it brilliant music is one of the great challenges in composition. So it's a big deal, the 6th movement, but right away he leads us into the 7th movement. This I call the moral of the story. Finally, for the first time, the dead come to the foreground. Selig sind die Toten. Blessed are the dead. And to emphasize the notion that the dead are with the Lord, the opening pitches of that Selig, blessed, are identical to the opening pitches of that Herr, Lord, in the preceding fugue. And in fact, he doesn't even give a kind of break between the 2nd and 7th movements. Just right away, the sopranos come in high in their register. Who knows? Well, I wonder if that's linked with the 5th movement, except he wrote the 7th much earlier. Anyway, so they come in right away with this Selig sind die Toten. Finally, as the movement progresses, about half, 2/3 of the way through, the Selig sind motive of the very beginning of the Requiem, the first thing that was sung, returns. Back then, it was Selig sind die da Leid tragen, blessed are those who carry sorrow, and now it's Selig sind die Toten, blessed are the dead. So everything is linked together. Because he has used that motive so often to the piece too, it feels like it never really went away, at least to me. Yes, you hear that we're back to where we started, but there's also a notion of it having been there with us all along, this notion of being blessed. And I would propose to you that this may be Brahms' point entirely, that the dead never really leave, but they remain here in the hearts of us, in the hearts of us the living. And this makes it truly a human requiem, as Brahms wished he had titled it. And he's indicating that all of us are selig, that we are all blessed because we have had each other in our lives. And I don't have anything particularly erudite to say beyond all of that. Are there any other questions? Hearing no objections, then I'll pass it back to Lars.
Thank you, Gary, very much for the humor and the knowledge and a little bit of what's to come. Very helpful. So, if there are no other questions, I will just again tell you that the Big Sing is coming up very shortly, about 2 weeks and a few days, on Saturday, October 20th, 2018. Singing will begin at 7 p.m. Come as early as 6:15 to get your score, find a seat, get settled in, meet folks around you, and be ready to enjoy singing and making music with folks from other choirs, from the community. It's sure to be a really special evening. Another note that I didn't mention at the beginning was we do have a link to pre-register to pay your $10 now, so you don't have to worry about that. We will be taking cash, and we will have the ability to take card at the door, but if you don't want to have to worry about paying when you get there, there will also be a link to pre-register and pay your $10 ahead of time. So I will send that out as well along with this recording, so that you can pass those along to your singers, to friends, to whoever is interested. Appreciate all of you joining live. I appreciate all of you watching after the fact, and we hope to see you all on Saturday, October 20th at 7 or shortly before.
I agree. I look forward to singing this with you all. It'll be a good evening. Thank you for your attentiveness. Cheers.